My name is Gage Wilson, and at 70 years old, I never expected to hear those words from my only son, Bradley, the boy I raised alone after my wife passed, demanding control of my pension. I sat there that evening, looking into eyes that used to light up when I walked into a room, now cold with calculation. I nodded and agreed, but what Bradley never understood was that sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. If you're watching this video right now, let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to teach someone that taking advantage of kindness doesn't mean weakness. I spent 45 years working at Westland Manufacturing, starting on the assembly line right after high school, and eventually becoming a floor supervisor. Nothing glamorous, but it was honest work that let me provide for my family. My wife, Amanda, and I bought our small 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood when Bradley was just 2 years old. We were so proud of that house, with its small yard and oak tree out front. Amanda planted flower beds along the walkway, and I built a tree house in the backyard when Bradley turned 8. Amanda was the light of my life for 43 years until cancer took her 5 years ago. She fought hard through 3 rounds of chemotherapy, but the cancer was more determined. Those final months were difficult, watching her fade away a little more each day. Bradley visited occasionally during her illness, always with an excuse about work being busy or traffic being bad. When she passed, he stood beside me at the funeral, patting my shoulder awkwardly before heading back to the city the next morning. Before Amanda got sick, we had dreams of traveling during my retirement. Nothing fancy, just driving across country in an RV to see the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone. We had a savings account labeled Adventure Fund that we put $20 into each week. After the medical bills and funeral expenses, that money went toward paying off the remainder of our mortgage instead. Bradley was our only child, born after years of trying. Maybe that's why we spoiled him more than we should have. When the other kids on the block got 1 present for Christmas, Bradley got 5. When he wanted the newest video game system, I worked overtime shifts to make it happen. Amanda was always a bit firmer with him, trying to instill gratitude and responsibility. I see now I should have listened to her more. In high school, Bradley was popular and charming when he wanted to be. His teachers often told us how bright he was, but that he only applied himself to subjects that interested him. I can't count how many times I sat at the kitchen table trying to help him with homework he'd put off until the last minute. When he got his first car at 16, a used Ford that I'd spent months fixing up, he wrecked it within 3 weeks, showing off to his friends. I bought him another one, ignoring Amanda's concerns about consequences. College was a struggle financially, but Amanda and I agreed it was worth any sacrifice. Bradley chose a business school 500 miles away, one of the more expensive options. We took out a second mortgage to cover what his scholarships didn't. He called home maybe once a month, usually when he needed money for books or unexpected expenses. Looking back, I wonder how many of those expenses were actually for parties or trips with friends. It was during his junior year that he met Tiffany. She was studying marketing, and according to Bradley, she was the smartest person he'd ever met. The first time he brought her home for Thanksgiving, Amanda and I were impressed by her politeness and the way she insisted on helping with the dishes. She complimented our home repeatedly, though I caught her taking a photo of our bathroom with a small smirk. At the time, I thought she was just sharing our holiday with friends. Now I suspect she was documenting what she considered outdated decor. They married 2 years after graduation, with a wedding far more lavish than either set of parents could comfortably afford. Tiffany's parents covered most of it, but Bradley insisted we contribute our fair share. That meant another loan against the house, one that took 3 years to pay off. Amanda worried about their spending habits even then, noticing Tiffany's designer clothes and their expensive honeymoon to Bali. But Bradley assured us they were doing well, both landing good jobs in marketing firms. For several years after their wedding, we saw them mostly on holidays. They always had reasons why they couldn't visit more often: work commitments, social obligations, the 5-hour drive being too tiresome. Amanda sent birthday and Christmas gifts that received brief thank you texts in return. When she got sick, Bradley and Tiffany sent flowers to the hospital, but visited only twice during her entire 18-month battle. After Amanda passed, something changed. Bradley and Tiffany started visiting more frequently, usually around dinner time. At first, I was grateful for the company. The house felt so empty without Amanda, her absence like a physical weight pressing down on me. I'd cook big meals whenever they said they were coming, happy to have someone to care for again. During those first visits, they'd ask about my retirement plans, my pension, what I planned to do with the house now that I was alone. I took their questions as concern for my well-being. I explained that my pension wasn't huge but covered my modest needs, and that I could never sell the house where Amanda and I had built our life together. Bradley would nod understandingly, but Tiffany often made comments about how the housing market was really hot right now and how I could cash in before prices dropped. She'd point out how much work the house required, how difficult the stairs might become as I aged, how a nice senior apartment would give me freedom from maintenance worries. I began noticing other changes too. They'd often admire certain items in my home. Amanda's collection of crystal figurines, the antique clock my father had given us as a wedding present, the leather recliner I'd splurged on after retirement. Within weeks of commenting on these items, they'd ask if they could borrow them for a while. The items never returned. Still, I made excuses for them. Bradley was my only child, my legacy in this world. Surely he was just concerned about my welfare. Surely his increasing interest in my finances was just wanting to make sure I was secure. The alternative was too painful to consider. That my son saw me as nothing more than a resource to be drained. The pattern became clearer about 2 years after Amanda passed. Bradley called one Tuesday evening, his voice tight with what he described as serious concerns. He and Tiffany had just bought a new SUV, top of the line with all the extra features. Unfortunately, their old car had broken down unexpectedly, meaning they needed to make 2 car payments instead of trading in as planned. "Dad, I hate to ask, but could you loan us $2,000 just until my bonus comes through next month?" The request caught me off guard. $2,000 was a significant amount from my fixed income, but he was my son, and he needed help. "Of course, Bradley. I'll write you a check when you visit this weekend. Actually, could you wire it tomorrow? The payment's due Friday." I sent the money the next morning. The promised repayment never materialized. When I gently asked about it 3 months later, Bradley looked genuinely confused. "I thought that was a gift, Dad. You know we're trying to save for a house in the good school district. If you really need it back." His tone made me feel petty and small. No, it's fine. I just misunderstood. That was the first of many loans. $500 for unexpected car repairs, $1,200 for a plumbing emergency, $3,000 toward a down payment on a house they never ended up buying. Each request came with promises of repayment that were quickly forgotten, each time making me feel increasingly uncomfortable about bringing it up. Their visits increased to nearly every weekend, almost always at dinner time. I'd spend all day cooking their favorite meals, grateful for their company despite the growing unease in my stomach. They'd arrive, Bradley kissing my cheek quickly while Tiffany headed straight to inspect what was cooking. "Smells delicious, Gage," she'd say, the use of my first name still jarring even after years of marriage to my son. "Though you really should try using less salt. Not good for a man your age." During these dinners, their conversation revolved increasingly around money. The raise Bradley was expecting but never quite got. The promotion Tiffany deserved but was given to the boss's favorite. The vacations their friends were taking that they couldn't afford. All while showing me photos on their newest model smartphones or mentioning the renovations they were doing to their condo. "You're so lucky, Dad," Bradley would say, gesturing around my modest living room with its 30-year-old furniture. "No mortgage, no real expenses. Your pension just piles up, doesn't it?" I tried explaining once that between property taxes, utilities, insurance, medication copays, and basic living expenses, my pension covered my needs but left little excess. Tiffany laughed as though I'd told an excellent joke. "But what do you even spend money on? You wear the same 5 shirts. You don't travel. You drive that ancient Toyota. Where does it all go?" I changed the subject, uncomfortable with their scrutiny of my finances. But the questions continued at each visit, becoming more pointed, more insistent. Then came the suggestions about my spending. When I mentioned replacing my 15-year-old refrigerator, Tiffany immediately interjected, "Do you really need a new one? Can't you just get that one repaired? Such a waste to replace appliances these days." Yet the following week, she proudly showed me photos of their brand new kitchen renovation, including top-of-the-line stainless steel appliances they'd put on a credit card because quality is worth investing in. I noticed they began timing their visits to coincide with when my pension check was deposited. Bradley would casually ask if I'd gotten paid yet, his eyes tracking my movements as I put leftovers in containers for them to take home. Sometimes he'd directly ask if I could help out again, citing unexpected expenses or temporary shortfalls. The amounts grew larger, the reasons vaguer, and the promises to repay became non-existent. One Saturday morning, I returned from the grocery store to find Bradley going through my mail on the kitchen table. He quickly shuffled the papers together when he saw me, but not before I noticed he'd been looking at my bank statement. "Just helping organize things, Dad. You know, making sure you're not missing any bills." I said nothing, but a coldness settled in my chest. That night, I moved all my financial documents to a locked drawer in my bedroom. Their disapproval when I spent money on myself became increasingly obvious. When I bought a new television to replace the old tube model Amanda and I had owned for 20 years, Bradley inspected the receipt left on the counter. $400? "Dad, that's way too much for someone on a fixed income. You could have gotten something basic for half that price." This from a man who I knew had a 70-inch smart TV mounted on his living room wall. "You need to be more careful with your money," Tiffany added. "You never know when you might need it for important things." Important things, I realized, meant whatever they decided they needed from me. The comments about my house became more frequent and direct. What started as subtle suggestions about downsizing turned into Bradley bringing home listings for senior apartments and assisted living facilities. "This place is just too much for you to maintain, Dad. Look at these gutters. They need cleaning. The lawn needs mowing. The paint is chipping. You'd be so much happier somewhere maintenance-free." I noticed how his eyes assessed each room as he spoke, like he was mentally calculating its value or imagining it emptied of my presence. Tiffany began rearranging things during visits, moving furniture, or suggesting I get rid of items that were just collecting dust. I'd find Amanda's things boxed up, Tiffany explaining she was helping organize but really removing all traces of my wife from our home. They began taking things without even asking. Bradley would carry bags to their car containing books, kitchen appliances, tools from my workshop. When I questioned it once, he looked surprised. "You never use this stuff anymore, Dad. It's just going to waste here." The final straw was when I discovered Amanda's jewelry box emptied of her good pieces. The diamond earrings I'd given her on our 30th anniversary, her mother's pearl necklace, the ruby ring passed down from her grandmother, all gone. When confronted, Tiffany casually mentioned she'd borrowed them for a work event and would bring them back sometime. They never returned, and I never saw Tiffany wear them. I suspect they were sold or pawned to fund whatever lifestyle upgrade they deemed essential that month. Through all of this, I kept making excuses. Bradley was struggling financially, despite appearances. He and Tiffany were just trying to help me simplify my life. They were looking out for my best interests in their own misguided way. But in my heart, I knew the truth I couldn't bear to admit. My only child saw me as nothing more than a convenience, an ATM, a future inheritance to be maximized. The little boy who once ran to me with skinned knees and bedtime fears now calculated the value of my existence in dollars and cents. The evening, everything changed, started like many others. It was a Thursday in early October, Pension Day, and Bradley had texted asking if they could come for dinner. I spent the afternoon making pot roast with potatoes and carrots, Bradley's favorite since childhood. I'd also baked an apple pie, carefully crimping the edges the way Amanda had taught me. They arrived 30 minutes late, no apology offered. Bradley was wearing a new watch I hadn't seen before, something sleek and expensive looking. Tiffany had a designer handbag that still had the protective plastic on its metal feet. Both were dressed as though they'd come from somewhere more important and were fitting me into their busy schedule. "Smells good, Dad," Bradley said, heading straight for the liquor cabinet and pouring himself a generous scotch without asking. "The roast needs another 10 minutes, I said, checking the oven. "How was your week?" Neither really answered. Tiffany was scrolling through her phone, making occasional comments about someone named Jessica's ridiculous social media posts. Bradley wandered around the living room, picking up and putting down small items, assessing them like merchandise. I was setting the table when Bradley noticed a piece of mail on the counter. It was a medical bill for some routine tests my doctor had ordered. Nothing serious, but with a $500 copay my insurance hadn't covered. "What's this?" he asked, waving the bill. "Just some blood work Dr. Marino ordered. Routine stuff for my age." Bradley frowned, looking at the total. $500? That's ridiculous. Are you sure this isn't a mistake? The insurance only covers 80% of lab work. It's fine. I have the money. Tiffany had wandered over, peering at the bill over Bradley's shoulder. That's why healthcare is such a scam in this country. They know they can charge whatever they want to old people because the insurance pays for it. I bristled at being lumped into some anonymous category of old people, but kept my expression neutral as I placed silverware on the table. Actually, I paid the copay myself. Insurance covered the rest. Bradley was still frowning at the bill. "So you just wrote a check for $500 without questioning it?" "Dad, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're too trusting with your money." I took the bill from his hands and placed it back on the counter. "Dinner's ready. Let's eat while it's hot." Throughout the meal, Bradley kept bringing the conversation back to finances. How much was my monthly pension exactly? What about Social Security? Did I have other investments they didn't know about? "I'm comfortable," I said repeatedly, trying to change the subject. "How's work going for you both?" But Bradley was fixated. As I served the apple pie, he launched into a speech about how concerned he was about my financial management. "Dad, Tiffany and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. You're spending money on unnecessary things, paying bills without questioning them, probably getting scammed left and right." Tiffany nodded vigorously. "We see it all the time with our friends' parents. Older people just aren't equipped to handle finances in today's digital world." I'd been managing my own money successfully for 50 years, including putting a child through college and caring for a sick wife. But I bit my tongue. Bradley put down his fork and leaned forward, his expression one I recognized from childhood when he was about to ask for something significant. "We think it would be best if I took over managing your finances." I froze with my coffee cup halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" "From now on, I want your paycheck sent to my account," Bradley declared, his tone suggesting this was both reasonable and inevitable. "You don't need anything anyway. We'll take care of buying what you need." I stared at him, thinking surely I'd misunderstood, but his expression was dead serious. Tiffany jumped in, her voice soothing as though speaking to a confused child. "It's really for the best, Gage. Bradley will make sure all your bills are paid, and you'll get a small allowance for little things. No more worrying about money." "An allowance?" I repeated, the word feeling bizarre in my mouth. "In my own home?" "You're getting older, Dad," Bradley said, his tone patronizing. "We've noticed you getting confused sometimes, forgetting things. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but you need help." This was news to me. My doctor had just given me a clean bill of health, including a cognitive assessment that showed no concerns. I hadn't forgotten anything significant or shown any signs of confusion. This was a fabrication, a pretense to gain control of my money. "I don't think that's necessary," I said quietly. "I'm managing fine." Bradley's expression hardened slightly. "It's not really a request, Dad. We've already talked to the bank about setting this up," they said with a power of attorney. "We can arrange for your pension to be deposited directly into our account." "A power of attorney?" "I haven't signed any power of attorney." Tiffany waved her hand dismissively. "That's just a formality. We brought the papers for you to sign tonight." I felt a cold wave wash over me. They had planned this, prepared for it. How long had they been plotting to take control of my finances, my independence, my dignity? Bradley pulled some folded papers from his jacket pocket and slid them across the table. It's standard stuff, nothing complicated. Just sign on the marked lines. I looked down at the document. It was indeed a power of attorney form, giving Bradley complete control over all my financial affairs, medical decisions, and property. Far more than just managing my pension. A lifetime of conditioning to avoid conflict, to keep peace in the family, to give my son whatever he wanted, pulled at me to just sign the papers. But something stronger held my pen motionless. The memory of Amanda saying, "Sometimes love means saying no." The knowledge that I'd enabled this entitlement through years of acquiescence. But I also knew direct confrontation wouldn't work. Bradley had a lifetime of experience manipulating me, wearing down my resistance, making me feel guilty for not giving him what he wanted. So I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "I see. Well, if you think it's for the best." The surprise on their faces at my easy capitulation quickly turned to satisfaction. They hadn't expected it to be this easy. "It is, Dad. You won't have to worry about anything anymore," Bradley said, relief evident in his voice. "I'll need to think about the details, though. Which account? How to set it up with the pension office? Can I have a day or two to sort it out?" Bradley looked momentarily uncertain, then nodded. "Sure, but don't take too long. The sooner we get this set up, the better." "Of course. I'll call you tomorrow with the information you'll need." They left shortly after, taking containers of leftover pot roast and half the pie. As they walked to their car, I heard Tiffany say, "That was easier than expected. I told you he'd see reason." I stood in the doorway, watching their taillights disappear down the street, feeling a strange mixture of heartbreak and resolve. For years, I'd been making excuses for Bradley's behavior, seeing only what I wanted to see. But tonight, the illusion had finally shattered completely. My son no longer saw me as a person deserving of dignity and respect. I was simply a resource to be controlled and exploited. I closed the door and leaned against it, allowing myself 5 minutes of pure grief, not just for the relationship I'd lost, but for my role in creating this situation through years of indulgence and lack of boundaries. Then I wiped my eyes, straightened my shoulders, and picked up the phone. It was time to implement the plan I'd been quietly preparing for months, hoping I'd never need to use. Few people knew that beneath my accommodating exterior lay a methodical mind. Working 45 years in manufacturing teaches you to analyze problems systematically and develop contingency plans. For the past year, I'd been doing exactly that regarding Bradley and Tiffany. It started with a conversation with my neighbor Frank about 18 months ago. Frank was a retired high school principal with a keen understanding of human behavior. We were having coffee on my porch when Bradley and Tiffany drove away after another dinner visit where they'd borrowed my pressure washer. "You know they're taking advantage of you, right?" Frank said bluntly. I started to make the usual excuses, but Frank shook his head. "Gage, I've known you 20 years. You're smarter than this. You see what's happening, you just don't want to admit it." He was right. That conversation was like a splash of cold water, forcing me to acknowledge what I'd been denying. Over the following weeks, I started paying closer attention and documenting everything. Items taken, money borrowed, comments made about my competence, suggestions about selling my house. I began meeting with a financial advisor named Sophia at a branch office across town where Bradley and Tiffany wouldn't see my car in the parking lot. My financial situation wasn't as simple as they believed. Yes, my pension was modest, but Amanda and I had been careful savers. I had investments, CDs, and savings accounts they knew nothing about. Sophia helped me reorganize my assets, securing them against potential exploitation. We set up accounts that would require multiple forms of verification to access, placed some investments in revocable trusts, and ensured my pension had protections in place. Financial abuse of seniors is unfortunately common, Sophia told me during one meeting, even from family members, sometimes especially from family members. Next, I consulted Martha, an attorney specializing in elder law. She helped me revise my will and create advance directives that named my sister Joyce as my healthcare proxy, not Bradley. Martha also advised me on how to document the ongoing behavior in case legal intervention became necessary. Keep receipts for everything they take. Write down dates, times, and exact words of concerning conversations. Take photos of items before and after they visit. Evidence is crucial, she advised. I followed her instructions meticulously, creating a detailed record of every interaction. I installed a small safe in my bedroom closet where I kept important documents and the few valuable items left that they hadn't yet borrowed. Joyce was my strongest ally throughout this process. Living in Arizona, she wasn't able to visit often, but our daily phone calls kept me grounded. Unlike me, she had always seen Bradley clearly. He was a manipulative child who grew into a manipulative adult, she said during one particularly difficult conversation after Bradley had taken Amanda's antique silver service without asking. You've been making excuses for him his entire life. He's my only child, I protested weakly. That doesn't give him the right to steal from you and treat you like you're incompetent, Joyce countered. Amanda would be heartbroken to see how he's behaving, and even more heartbroken to see you allowing it. That statement hit me hard. Amanda had always been the disciplinarian, the one who tried to instill values and boundaries. I had undermined her efforts by indulging Bradley, and now I was facing the consequences of those choices. With Joyce's encouragement, I began making other changes. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during Amanda's illness. I joined a senior center writing group. I volunteered at the local library. Gradually, I built a support network beyond Bradley, people who saw me as a whole person with value beyond what I could provide financially. As Bradley and Tiffany's behavior escalated, I consulted again with Martha about my legal options. You have every right to set boundaries, including limiting contact if necessary, she assured me. But given what you've described, they may escalate their tactics if directly confronted. Together, we developed a strategy for how to respond when they inevitably made a more aggressive move for control of my finances. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary, that something would change, that Bradley would remember the values Amanda and I had tried to instill. But hope isn't a strategy, and I needed to be prepared. After the dinner where Bradley demanded access to my pension, I knew the time had come to implement our plan. The moment they drove away, I called Joyce. It finally happened, I told her, my voice surprisingly steady. They want power of attorney and control of my pension. And what did you say? Joyce asked, concern evident in her voice. I pretended to agree, asked for a day or two to arrange things. Good. That gives us time. Are you ready to do this? I took a deep breath, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and determination. Yes. They're coming back tomorrow night for dinner again. Everything needs to be ready by then. I wish I could be there, Joyce said. Me too, but we've planned for this. I know what to do. After hanging up, I called Frank, who came over immediately to help. We spent hours preparing the house for the next evening's confrontation. We moved furniture, rearranged photos, printed documents, and set up discreet recording devices, which Martha had confirmed was legal in my state, as long as I was present in the conversation. In my dining room, we created a display of evidence, copies of checks I'd written to Bradley that were never repaid, photos of items before and after they were borrowed, a list of suggestions they'd made about selling my house or moving to assisted living. On the dining room table, where we normally ate the meals I lovingly prepared, I placed itemized bills for every dinner I'd cooked them over the past year, calculated at restaurant prices. Beside that, I put a property list of everything they'd taken, with estimated values. Frank helped me empty several rooms of their most valuable contents, creating a striking visual statement about what had been slowly disappearing over time. We removed paintings from walls, leaving empty hooks. We cleared shelves of books and decorative items, leaving dust outlines. The cumulative effect was unsettling, a physical manifestation of how they had been steadily stripping my home and life. Are you sure you want to do this alone? Frank asked, as we finished our preparations near midnight. I could stay tomorrow, be here when they arrive. I shook my head. This is between me and my son. It needs to be just us. Frank nodded, understanding. Call me immediately after they leave. No matter what time, I will. After Frank left, I sat alone in my altered home, feeling the weight of what was to come. There was deep sorrow in knowing that my relationship with my only child had deteriorated to this point. Yet alongside that grief was a growing sense of empowerment. For too long I'd allowed myself to be manipulated and taken advantage of, making excuses for inexcusable behavior. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. I was under no illusion that there would be a happy reconciliation, tearful apologies, or sudden transformation. Real life rarely works that way. But there would be truth, finally spoken aloud after years of silent enabling. I slept surprisingly well that night, as though the decision itself had lifted a burden I'd been carrying for years. In the morning I called Bradley. "I've thought about what you said," I told him, keeping my voice tentative. "I think you're right about helping with my finances. Can you and Tiffany come for dinner again tonight? I'll have the papers ready to sign." "That's great, Dad." Bradley sounded genuinely pleased. "I knew you'd see reason. We'll be there at 6. "I'll make your favorite lasagna," I said, though I had no intention of cooking anything. After hanging up, I made my final preparations. I laid out documents Martha had helped me prepare, clearly stating my financial boundaries. I reviewed my notes to ensure I wouldn't forget anything important in the emotion of the moment. I charged my phone and kept it in my pocket, ready to call Frank or even the police if necessary. Then I sat in Amanda's old rocking chair, looking at our wedding photo, drawing strength from the memory of her steadfast character. "I should have listened to you more," I told her image, "but I'm trying to make it right now." As the afternoon light began to fade, I heard Bradley's car pull into the driveway. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and prepared to finally stand my ground. At precisely 6:15, Bradley and Tiffany rang the doorbell instead of using their key as they normally did. I suspected they were feeling triumphant, certain they had finally secured access to my finances. The formality of ringing the bell seemed like a small acknowledgement that our relationship was changing, becoming more businesslike. I took a deep breath, checked that my phone was recording in my pocket as Martha had suggested, and opened the door with a neutral expression. "Come in," I said simply, stepping aside. Bradley entered first, a folder tucked under his arm that likely contained additional financial documents for me to sign. Tiffany followed, already looking around for what I'd prepared for dinner. Both froze just 3 steps into the living room. The transformation was immediate and striking. Where a bookshelf full of family photos had stood was now an empty space with only outlines in the dust. The walls where artwork had hung now displayed only vacant hooks. The antique coffee table Amanda had inherited from her grandmother was gone, leaving a conspicuous empty spot on the rug. "Dad? What's going on? Where's all your stuff?" Bradley asked, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "That's an interesting question coming from you," I replied calmly. "Please, come into the dining room. We have things to discuss." They followed me hesitantly, exchanging glances. The dining room was even more dramatically altered. The large table where we'd shared countless meals was now covered with neatly organized papers instead of food. The china cabinet stood open and empty, the good dishes and silver long since borrowed and never returned. On the walls where family photos had hung, I'd placed enlarged copies of checks I'd written to Bradley, each with the date and amount clearly visible, along with notes about the promised repayment that never happened. "What is all this?" Tiffany asked, her voice higher than usual. "Where's dinner?" "There is no dinner tonight," I said, pulling out a chair. "Please, sit down, both of you." Something in my tone must have conveyed that this wasn't a request. They sat, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "For the past 2 years," I began, my voice steady, "you have been systematically taking advantage of my generosity and love. You have borrowed money that was never repaid, taken items from my home without permission, and gradually attempted to strip me of my independence and dignity." Bradley started to protest, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Last night, you crossed a line by demanding control of my pension and attempting to get me to sign away my financial autonomy. That will never happen. I pointed to the documents on the wall. These are copies of checks totaling $27,400 that I've given you over the past 2 years. You promised to repay most of these loans. Not a single dollar has been returned. Tiffany's face had gone pale. Bradley's was flushing red. Dad, those were gifts. You offered to help us. We never. They were not gifts, I interrupted firmly. I have recordings of several conversations where you specifically promised repayment. Would you like to hear them? The bluff worked. Bradley fell silent, looking at the table. I gestured to a typed list in front of them. This is an inventory of items taken from this house without permission. Amanda's jewelry alone is valued at approximately $16,000. Family heirlooms that weren't yours to take. Tiffany shifted uncomfortably. I was just borrowing those. I was going to return. It's been 8 months, Tiffany. Those items were never returned. In fact, nothing that leaves this house with you ever comes back. I pulled out another document. This is an itemized bill for every meal I've prepared for you over the past year. 97 dinners at an average cost of $35 each, not including the leftovers you take home. That's $3,395 in food alone. Bradley's expression was darkening from embarrassment to anger. So what, now you're charging your own son for meals? Is that what this is about? Money? No, Bradley. This isn't about money. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that I am not a resource to be drained, but a person who deserves consideration. It's about acknowledging that taking advantage of someone who loves you is a profound betrayal. I placed a final document on the table. This is a formal statement, prepared by my attorney, establishing clear boundaries going forward. I will not be signing over power of attorney. I will not be redirecting my pension to your account. I will not be selling my house or moving to any facility you suggest. Bradley stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. Your attorney? You've been talking to a lawyer behind our backs? Just as you've been planning to take control of my finances behind mine, I replied evenly. The difference is that my actions are legal and ethical. This is ridiculous, Tiffany interjected. We were just trying to help you. You're getting older. You need support. I had a complete physical and cognitive assessment 3 months ago, I interrupted. My doctor found no issues with my ability to manage my own affairs. I have copies of those reports if you'd like to see them. Bradley was pacing now, his face contorted with anger. I can't believe this. My own father, treating me like some kind of criminal. After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me, Bradley? I asked quietly. When was the last time you visited without taking something or asking for money? When was the last time you called just to check how I'm doing? Not to tell me about some financial emergency. When was the last time you offered to help me with anything without expecting something in return? The questions hung in the air unanswered. You know, I continued, your mother worried about the values we were instilling in you. She thought I was too soft, too willing to bail you out of every problem. She was right. I failed you by never teaching you that love isn't an endless ATM, that respect isn't optional in relationships, that family means supporting each other, not exploiting each other. Tiffany had stood up now too, gathering her purse. I'm not going to sit here and be insulted. We were trying to help, and this is the thanks we get? Accusations and bills? This isn't about thanks, I replied. It's about boundaries, which I should have established long ago. Going forward, here are the rules. No more financial support of any kind. No more borrowing items from this house. If you want to visit, call first, and I'll let you know if it's convenient. If you bring up selling my house or controlling my finances again, the visit ends immediately. Bradley was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock and building rage. You can't be serious. After everything we've done, I've never been more serious, I interrupted. And to be clear, there was no pension transfer. I told you what you wanted to hear last night to buy time to prepare for this conversation. That was the breaking point. Bradley slammed his fist on the table, making the papers jump. You lied to us? You manipulated us into coming here for this ambush? Who do you think you are? I'm your father, I said quietly. But more importantly, I'm a person deserving of basic respect. Something you seem to have forgotten. This is unbelievable, Bradley sputtered. We're leaving. Come on, Tiffany. Before you go, I said, sliding an envelope across the table. This is a detailed list of everything taken from this house over the past 2 years. I expect the items to be returned or paid for within 30 days, or I will pursue legal options as advised by my attorney. Bradley snatched up the envelope and tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. Sue your own son. See how that works out for you. Good luck finding a lawyer who won't laugh at a case between father and son. Martha Peterson of Peterson Elder Law isn't laughing, I replied calmly. She's quite concerned about the pattern of financial exploitation she's documented. Tiffany tugged at Bradley's arm. Let's go. This is pointless. As they moved toward the door, Bradley turned back, his expression cold. You're going to regret this, Dad. When you're sitting alone in this empty house with no one to help you, you'll wish you hadn't done this. I met his gaze steadily. I'd rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by people who see me only as a resource to be drained. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the front blinds, I watched them arguing intensely in the driveway before getting into their car and speeding away, tires squealing on the asphalt. I stood in the sudden silence of my home, feeling a complex mixture of emotions washing over me. There was profound sadness at what had just transpired, at the relationship that had deteriorated to this point. There was anger too, not just at Bradley and Tiffany, but at myself for enabling their behavior for so long. But beneath those feelings was something unexpected: relief. For years I had been walking on eggshells, making excuses, ignoring the evidence of their true intentions. The constant stress of maintaining the illusion that everything was fine had been exhausting. Now, finally, the truth was in the open. No more pretending, no more willful blindness. I carefully gathered the torn envelope from the floor, taping it back together and placing it in a folder with my other documentation. Then I called Frank as promised. It's done, I told him when he answered. They're gone. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over? I considered the question seriously. No, I said finally. For the first time in a long time, I think I actually am okay. After hanging up, I walked slowly through my altered home, straightening papers and returning some items to their places. The confrontation had gone largely as expected. There had been anger, denial, attempts to shift blame. There had been no acceptance of responsibility, no recognition of wrongdoing. I hadn't really expected there would be. What happens next would depend on Bradley. The door wasn't permanently closed, but it would only reopen on new terms, with clear boundaries and expectations of mutual respect. Whether he could accept that remained to be seen. I made myself a simple sandwich and sat in Amanda's rocking chair, looking at our wedding photo. I finally did it, I told her. I stood up for myself, just like you always wanted me to. I could almost hear her reply. It's about time, Gage. It's about time. The silence that followed was deafening. For someone who had grown accustomed to near-weekly visits, phone calls asking for money, and constant text messages about coming for dinner, the sudden absence of contact was jarring. Days stretched into weeks, with no word from Bradley or Tiffany. The first few days after the confrontation, my phone stayed clutched in my hand, half expecting an angry call or message. By the end of the first week, I found myself checking my email repeatedly, looking for some response to what had happened. By the second week, I realized they were employing the silent treatment, a tactic Bradley had used since childhood when he didn't get his way. Frank checked on me daily, either stopping by or calling. They're waiting for you to break first, he said over coffee one morning, to feel guilty and reach out to apologize. I know, I admitted, and part of me wants to. Isn't that ridiculous? After everything they've done, I still feel like I'm the one who caused the problem by standing up for myself. That's exactly what they count on, Gage. That's how they've controlled you for years. He was right, of course. The pattern was so ingrained that even knowing what they had done, even with all the evidence literally on my walls, I still questioned whether I had been too harsh. 3 weeks after the confrontation, when I was putting away groceries, the weight of everything suddenly hit me. I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by unpacked bags, sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't just the current situation, but the accumulated grief of years. Amanda's death, the slow recognition of my son's true character, the lonely acknowledgement of my role in enabling his behavior. I called Joyce that night, my voice still raw from crying. I miss him, I confessed, ashamed of my weakness. Despite everything, he's my only child. What if he never speaks to me again? Joyce's voice was gentle but firm. Gage, listen to me. You did what was necessary. If Bradley wants a relationship with you, it has to be one based on respect, not exploitation. The ball is in his court now. But what if he chooses no relationship at all? Then that's his choice, and a painful consequence of his own actions. You can't control his response, only your own boundaries. We talked for nearly 2 hours, Joyce helping me work through the complex emotions. By the end of the call, I felt steadier, more resolved. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. 4 weeks after the confrontation, I was surprised by a knock at my door on a Sunday afternoon. When I opened it, Tiffany stood there alone, looking uncharacteristically subdued. "Can I come in?" she asked, her usual confidence absent. I hesitated, then stepped aside, briefly. "Where's Bradley?" "He doesn't know I'm here," she admitted, following me into the living room. He'd be furious if he found out. I'd restored most of the room to normal, though many spaces remained conspicuously empty where items had been taken. Tiffany perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, clutching her purse. "I wanted to," she began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Things got out of hand that night. It wasn't quite an apology, but her discomfort was genuine. "Yes, they did," I agreed, waiting for her to continue. "Bradley's been." She looked down at her hands. "He's not in a good place right now. He feels betrayed." The irony of that statement hung in the air between us. "I see," I said neutrally. "And how do you feel, Tiffany?" She looked startled by the question, as though no one had asked about her feelings in a long time. "Honestly, embarrassed and scared." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "Things aren't good with us, financially, I mean. We've been spending more than we make for years." This wasn't particularly surprising given their apparent lifestyle, but I remained silent, letting her continue. "Bradley has a gambling problem," she blurted suddenly. "Online sports betting. It started small but got worse after his father-in-law died last year. We're in debt, a lot of debt." This new information cast their behavior in a slightly different light, though it didn't excuse it. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "Addiction is a serious issue. Is he getting help?" Tiffany shook her head. "He won't admit there's a problem. Says he's just had a streak of bad luck, that the next big win will fix everything." She looked up, her eyes wet. "The things we took from your house, the money we borrowed. Most of it went to cover gambling losses or pay off bookies." I absorbed this revelation silently. It explained some things but created new questions. "Why are you telling me this now, Tiffany?" She wiped at her eyes quickly. "I don't know. Maybe I just needed someone to know the truth. Maybe I'm hoping you can help him somehow." "I can't help someone who doesn't want help," I said gently. "And I won't enable destructive behavior, for his sake as much as mine." "I know," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have asked. I should go before Bradley wonders where I am." At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I am sorry about taking Amanda's jewelry. That was wrong. I've been trying to figure out how to get it back, but Bradley sold most of it months ago." The confirmation hurt, even though I'd suspected as much. "Thank you for telling me the truth, at least." After Tiffany left, I called Martha to update her on this new development. "Addiction would explain some of their financial desperation," she acknowledged, "but it doesn't change the fact that they were exploiting you. If anything, it means the exploitation would likely have continued or worsened as his gambling problems grew." "Should I try to help him get treatment?" I asked. "That's entirely up to you, Gage. But remember, you can offer support without sacrificing your boundaries. Any help should be contingent on Bradley acknowledging his behavior and actively seeking treatment. 2 days later, a letter arrived from Bradley. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter. Something so unusual that I stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. The contents were both what I expected and disappointing. There was no real acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no apology for the exploitation or manipulation. Instead, it was a lengthy justification, explaining how everything he'd done had been out of concern for me, how hurt he was by my accusations, and how ungrateful I was being for all their help. The final paragraph was the most revealing. If you want to repair our relationship, you know what you need to do. We can go back to the way things were, with no mention of these unpleasant accusations. The choice is yours, Dad. The choice was indeed mine, and for the first time in years, I was thinking clearly enough to make the right one. I placed the letter in my documentation folder without responding. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life beyond Bradley. I continued volunteering at the library, joined a senior hiking group that met weekly for gentle trails, and became more active in my writing group. Frank and I started a weekly chess game that usually involved more conversation than actual chess. I also found a support group for parents dealing with adult-child estrangement. The stories shared there were both heartbreaking and validating. I wasn't alone in having to set difficult boundaries with a child I loved deeply, but who had become harmful to my well-being. The hardest part, said Eleanor, a woman in her 70s whose daughter hadn't spoken to her in 5 years, is accepting that you can love someone completely while still recognizing that their presence in your life is destructive, that love and boundaries aren't mutually exclusive. Those words resonated deeply. I did love Bradley. Nothing could erase the memory of his small hand in mine as we crossed streets, his gap-toothed smile when he learned to ride a bike, his proud face at his college graduation. But love without limits becomes enabling, and enabling isn't love at all. 3 months after our confrontation, I received a text from Bradley asking if we could meet for coffee. Just him, no Tiffany. The message was brief, but included the words "I need to talk to you," with no demands or conditions attached. I agreed, suggesting a public coffee shop rather than my home. When I arrived, he was already there, looking thinner than I remembered and with dark circles under his eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. "Of course," I replied, waiting for him to continue. He stared into his coffee cup for a long moment. "Tiffany left me," he finally said, 3 weeks ago. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "She said she couldn't handle the financial chaos anymore. Said she'd tried to talk to me about getting help, but I wouldn't listen." I remained silent, letting him speak at his own pace. "She told me she went to see you," he continued. "That she told you about the gambling." "She did." He finally looked up. "Are you going to say I told you so?" "No, Bradley. I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to listen." Something in his expression cracked slightly. "I've made a mess of everything, Dad. The gambling, the debt, how I treated you. All of it." It wasn't a full apology or acknowledgement, but it was more self-awareness than he'd shown in years. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it made my heart ache. "I don't know. I'm staying with a friend for now, trying to figure things out." "Are you getting help for the gambling?" He nodded slowly. "Started going to GA meetings last week. It's hard, really hard, but I know I need to do it." We talked for nearly an hour, carefully navigating the fragile beginnings of a new, more honest communication. I made no promises of financial help, and to his credit, he asked for none. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated. "I know I have a lot to make up for, Dad. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I just hope that maybe, eventually, we can find a way forward." "I hope so too, son," I said, meaning it. One day at a time. It was a beginning, tentative and uncertain, not a happily ever after ending, but a possible path toward something healthier, more honest, more respectful. Only time would tell whether Bradley could maintain his commitment to change, whether we could build a new relationship on better foundations. As I drove home, I felt a complex mixture of cautious hope and protective vigilance. The road ahead would not be easy for either of us, but for the first time in years, it felt like we might be moving in the right direction, with eyes open to the truth rather than clouded by denial and enabling. When I walked into my house, I looked at Amanda's photo and smiled slightly. "It's a start," I told her. "Just a start, but it's something." 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, my life had transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. The house that had once felt increasingly like a site of exploitation now felt like a true sanctuary again. I'd reclaimed not just my physical space, but my sense of self-worth and autonomy. My routine had expanded beyond the narrow confines it had gradually shrunk to during years of accommodating Bradley and Tiffany's demands. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I volunteered at a youth center near the library, teaching a financial literacy class to teenagers. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now helping young people develop healthy relationships with money after failing to do the same with my own son. "The thing about money," I told my students during one session, "is that it's never just about the dollars and cents. It's about power, security, self-worth, and boundaries. How you manage money reflects how you value yourself and others." Those weren't just words I shared with them. They were truths I was finally living myself. I'd learned to say no without guilt, to spend on things that brought me joy without justification, and to give generously to causes I believed in without being manipulated. My social circle had expanded as well. Frank remained a steadfast friend, but I'd also reconnected with former colleagues from Westland Manufacturing, joined a weekly poker group, playing only with small stakes, something Bradley might find instructive, and even started dating occasionally, though nothing serious had developed yet. Joyce visited for 2 weeks in the spring, her first extended stay since Amanda's funeral. We spent hours talking, reminiscing about our childhood, processing our grief over Amanda, and discussing the slow, complicated evolution of my relationship with Bradley. "You look 10 years younger," she told me one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "There's a lightness to you that I haven't seen since before Amanda got sick." "I feel lighter," I admitted. I didn't realize how much energy it took to maintain all those illusions, to keep making excuses for behavior I knew was wrong. Bradley and I were cautiously rebuilding our relationship. After our coffee shop meeting, we'd established a new pattern of occasional lunch meetups, always in public places, always with clear beginnings and endings. Sometimes we'd go weeks without contact, but unlike before, the silence now felt respectful rather than manipulative. He continued attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings and had started seeing a therapist to work through the underlying issues driving his addiction. In our conversations, he'd begun acknowledging, bit by bit, the patterns of entitlement and manipulation that had characterized his behavior for years. "I've been thinking a lot about what Mom would say about all this," he said during one lunch. "She always called me out when I was being selfish, even as a kid. I just got better at ignoring her." "Your mother was a wise woman," I replied. "She tried to instill values that I sometimes undermined by being too indulgent." "That's not all on you, Dad," Bradley said, surprising me with this new willingness to take responsibility. "I knew exactly how to play you. I could tell when you felt guilty about working long hours or not being there for some school thing. I learned to use that guilt as leverage." These moments of honest reflection gave me cautious hope, though I maintained the boundaries Martha had helped me establish. I'd made it clear that financial support was off the table until Bradley demonstrated consistent responsibility and repaid at least a portion of what he'd taken previously. To my surprise, he'd accepted these terms without argument. Tiffany had moved to another state for a fresh start. According to Bradley, they'd divorced quickly, with little drama given their financial situation. I occasionally thought about her visit, her moment of honesty, and hoped she too was finding a healthier path. In early autumn, nearly a year after our confrontation, I had an unexpected encounter that brought home how far I'd come. I was shopping at the farmer's market when I overheard a conversation between a middle-aged woman and her elderly father. "Dad, you don't need to buy organic tomatoes. They're twice the price of regular ones. At your age, what difference does it make anyway? The dismissive tone, the casual diminishment of the older man's choices and agency, was painfully familiar. I watched the man's shoulders slump as he put back the tomatoes he'd been examining, his daughter taking control of the shopping cart and steering it toward less expensive options. Without thinking, I approached them, addressing the father directly. "Excuse me, sir. I couldn't help noticing those heirloom tomatoes you were looking at. They're from the Johnson farm, just outside town. Best tomatoes I've had in years. Worth every penny if you enjoy them." The man smiled slightly while his daughter frowned. "We're on a budget," she said curtly. "Dad doesn't need to waste money on fancy tomatoes." I kept my attention on the father. "You know what I've learned in 70 years. Life's too short to eat mediocre tomatoes if you can afford better ones. Small pleasures matter, especially as we get older." The man straightened slightly. "Actually, Diane, I think I will get the organic ones. It's my money, and tomatoes are one of the few things I can still taste properly." The daughter looked annoyed but didn't argue further. As they moved away, the father gave me a small nod of thanks. That brief interaction crystallized something important for me. The boundaries I'd established with Bradley weren't just about protecting myself. They were about modeling healthier relationships between parents and adult children for both of us. They were about breaking cycles of enabling and entitlement that ultimately harm everyone involved. When I shared this story with my support group, Eleanor nodded in understanding. "That's the thing about setting boundaries," she said. "They're not just for us. They're a gift to the people we love too, even if they don't see it that way at first. You're showing Bradley that he can stand on his own, that he's capable of more than being dependent on you." In our most recent meeting, Bradley had mentioned the possibility of moving to a smaller apartment to save money and starting a side business doing marketing consultation for small, local businesses. "It would be a lot of work getting started," he'd said, "but I think I could build something sustainable, something I could be proud of." The fact that he didn't follow this statement with a request for startup funds felt like significant progress. Instead, he asked for advice about creating a business plan and whether I knew anyone from my manufacturing days who might need marketing help. "I'd be happy to introduce you to some folks," I told him, "and maybe look over your business plan when it's ready." Support without enabling, encouragement without rescue, boundaries with love. These were the new foundations we were attempting to build upon. As I reflect now on this entire journey, I recognize the profound lessons it has taught me. For years, I mistook indulgence for love, enabling for support. I allowed my own guilt and fear of conflict to override my responsibility to help my son develop into a self-sufficient, ethical adult. The truth is that sometimes love means standing firm when every instinct calls for surrender. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to allow those we care about to face the consequences of their actions. And sometimes, setting boundaries isn't about pushing others away, but about creating the healthy space necessary for genuine connection to grow. I don't know what the future holds for Bradley and me. Rebuilding trust is a slow process, with setbacks alongside progress. But I do know that I've found a peace and self-respect I hadn't experienced in years. I've discovered that it's never too late to establish healthy boundaries, to reconnect with your own worth, to reclaim your dignity. If there's one thing I wish I could tell others facing similar situations, it's this. True generosity comes from a place of choice, not obligation or manipulation. True love maintains standards of mutual respect, and sometimes the kindest word in the English language is simply no. What about you? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you love? How did you find the courage to stand your ground when it would have been easier to give in? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more reflections from someone who's learned life's lessons the hard way. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your self-respect and stand in your truth. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to set the boundaries you deserve in your own life.